Greetings and welcome to another episode of Learn About Port Wine. Actually excited about this video because we are launching a new series that is just on the Port Lodge tours of Gaia. It is on so many people's to-do list when they do come to Porto and Gaia, and we just want to let you know what to expect. Is it worth your time and is it worth your money? We're going to introduce a very easy rating system, and I've created a set of somewhat objective criteria that every Port Lodge tour will be measured against. We are starting off the series with the tour at Ferreira. They are one of the oldest names in port wine and have an amazing legacy. Is the Ferreira Tour worth your time and money when you come here to learn about port wine? Let's find out. Of all the videos I've created since I've begun this channel, the ones that get the most views by far are the ones dealing with the Port Lodge tours and tasting rooms in Porto. What I wanted to do was create a series that included a very easy rating system and a set of objective criteria that each visit would be measured against. I think this is the best way to see if it's worth your time and money when you come to visit us here. So real quickly, I just want to buzz through the ratings and the criteria, and then we will get started with our review of Ferreira. The rating system, very simple. Highly recommended, recommended, recommended with reservation, and not recommended. Hopefully there won't be too many in the not recommended, but there will be at least one or two. So I drafted some criteria that I want to be fairly objective, although there will still be some subjective opinions from me in there. The first one is online booking and ticketing. How easy is it for you to include this tour in your travel plans? Overall tour, and this is going to cover things like the length of the tour, how much time you spend doing it, the distance covered, the size of the groups, the quality of the guide, and the overall learning experience. It's going to cover the tasting room and experience and the price for each individual tour that we feature. We're also going to briefly look at the retail sales area. We are going to wrap things up with an overall experience and feel, followed by pros and cons, and then finally the rating. How does Ferreira measure up? Logistically, it's located at the westernmost end of the Gaia waterfront. It's a little bit off the beaten path, but it is still very easy to get to. Ticketing. Ferreira has a very thorough website, and you're able to book and purchase your ticket via the site. They share a scheduling ticketing platform with their sister property, Sandemans, and it gets the job done, but it's not great. You'll see the various tour options available, and when you select the tour you want, you're taken to a calendar page which should just show you the dates and times that the tour takes place. Instead, you have to click on each day to see which particular tours are offered on what dates and times. Premium tours are not offered every day, and you know I always recommend the premium tour, so it might take a little perseverance on your part to find the tour that you want that coincides with your schedule. So when you arrive for your tour, you'll check in at the reception desk, and then they'll ask you to wait in like the waiting area. It's actually a huge space that is part of the working cellar, and it has a small museum behind it. But there's a lot of cool historic props there, some pictures, some information about the company. And when it's time for your tour to begin, your tour guide will come out, make an announcement, everyone meets up, and the tour gets underway. It starts in the small museum at the end of the waiting area, and the guide will tell you about the Douro Valley, a little bit about the company, and a little bit about just the culture of port wine in Porto. From there, you actually enter into the tour space, and you kick it off by going into it's like a house. It's like a real legit old house right there in the building. And the tour guide talks about the history of the building and the importance of it to the history of the company. And inside there, they have a lot of displays with ledgers and manuscripts and photos and all kinds of documents on the history of the company. It's really a great historic presentation, and they do a really good job of presenting their brand. So while inside this old house that's part of the company's history, you start to learn a little bit about Dona Antonia, and she is like the grande dame of port wine. You will hear her name all through the city as you go through these various tours and learning opportunities, things like that. Even apart from the Ferreira brand, she was a very important person in the history of port wine. As you leave the cool little house that's in the building, you'll start the tour proper. And this is one of the longest tours distance-wise. It's not ridiculously long, but you cover a good amount of territory just as they're taking you through different parts of the cellars, where both the ruby style ports are stored and where the tawny style ports are stored, and you get to see all of it. I'm not going to do a breakdown of every particular area because I don't want to spoil your pleasure, but they certainly cover all the important parts. As far as the tour guide goes, our tour guide, Andrea, she was fantastic. Not only was she very knowledgeable about the history of the company, about production of port wine, but she presented it in a very fresh and engaging way. I mean, you can imagine how many times she has to run through the same facts and figures as a professional tour guide. She found a way to do it that makes it look like she actually enjoys her job, and that was very much appreciated. The size of our group was right at about 7 people, which is a perfect size, and because of the nature of the ticket we bought, everyone in that group was part of the same tasting. Different port lodges will do different things. Sometimes they'll have one large group that they take through the initial part of the tour, and then they will split you up based on your tasting options. But fortunately for us, everyone in the group was part of the same tasting. Tasting room. Okay, so now I purchased the Porto Vintage Visit for 48 euros. And during the booking process, it tells you where the tasting will take place. And this listed the Blue Tiles room. The Blue Tiles tasting room is a private tasting area that's at the very back of the main tasting room. When we entered that room, it was like, this place is beautiful. It's so well done. The theme of the room is, of course, the blue tiles that Portugal is famous for. And it's just a beautifully done, very well appointed room. It's easily one of the nicest premium tasting rooms I've seen, and it was just a great experience. We had the same guide that led us through the tasting as the one that led us through the cellars. And we were presented with 4 wines: a 20-year-old tawny, a 2019 LBV, a 2017 vintage, and a 2015 vintage. Our guide stepped us through the wines, and I thoroughly enjoyed each wine. So the only negative aspect for me from the tasting portion was we didn't have the option to purchase additional tastings. It's very common on tastings like this, especially because the ticket was so inexpensive, that you're not getting, of course, the oldest of the old vintages. And I would have liked to try some of the more mature vintages, maybe a 20-year, 30-year range kind of thing, just to see the development of the age. But that option just wasn't available. We were able to enjoy the wines that were presented to us, but just couldn't purchase any additional tasting. It certainly appeared that everyone in the group enjoyed the tour and the tasting as well. It was a really good mix of people that all had a certain level of wine knowledge, so we were able to just trade notes and recommendations about other wines to check out, things like that. And including the tour, the tasting, and then just the time we spent talking at the table. It was almost 2 hours before I got out of there and headed home. So it was definitely a really good time. As far as the retail sales area, you have to exit that to get out of the building. And it is as expected. They had a great stock of their wines, so you could go home with anything you tasted, as well as anything else that strikes your fancy. Overall experience and feel. I loved it. Again, this was the Porto Vintage Visit tour at Ferreira. They have multiple tours available, and not every tour will probably provide the same degree of happiness. I had done another tour there before, and we ended up in a different tasting room, and it just wasn't the best experience. But for this one, the Porto Vintage Visit, absolutely perfect. Just a wonderful experience. Pros and cons. Pros, the ability to purchase completely online, to schedule the visit and pay for it all in one shot is definitely a plus. The other pros were the quality of the tour guide, the length of the tour itself, the amount of information and history presented, and that wonderful tasting room. As far as cons, although you're able to purchase a ticket online, they really need to redo that system because it just doesn't work great. And then the only other con would be the inability to purchase additional tasting options when you're at the tasting. Other than that, it was just a fantastic experience, and therefore I can easily give this a rating of highly recommended. Great location, great facility, great tour, great wines, what's not to like? So if you find yourself in Porto and Gaia looking for a tour and you can book yourself this tour at Ferreira, again, highly recommended. As always, I'm going to wrap up with a request to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the dinger so you'll be notified when new videos drop. This is a new series, and I'm hoping to release a new Port Lodge tour review every week. So, fingers crossed, wish me luck, and I will see you next time on Learn About Port Wine.